You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to the writingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Writing Community Chat Show. It's Friday night and we are back with another live video. This show is all about bringing authors to this show and showcasing what they have as a person and as a professional, whether they're indie authors or whether they're New York Times bestsellers. We bring everyone from the community together and the people that watch this as well. We thank you, and if you're listening back on the podcast or watching it on YouTube, we thank you as well. So it's a great place to come and be part of this writing community. So we love this show for that reason. Chris Hooley, you are here with me. How are you doing, Chris?
I was very surprised by how professional that was.
Why, thank you.
Yeah, I think that
always...
It was a brilliant intro. Well done, my friend.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's nice to see you and to chat to you. How's your week been?
Yeah, it's been a hot one for a lot of people.
Oh, hasn't it just? We've all been sweating and very uncomfortable. If you're not in the UK and you're listening to this or watching it, in the UK, we are not prepared for hot weather. We don't have AC units anywhere because we just don't get it enough. And when the sun is out, it's nice, but it's been sticky and horridly humid the past couple of days and we can't sleep. It's been horrible. But then, it's going to phase out very soon. It'll be dark in winter. So, there you go. Brandon's, thank you for tuning in. Brandon's already said you can take his shirt off, and I bet Hooley is in his pants.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah. I mean, we get it. Compared to other countries, I think we suffer a little bit because, as Anya has just said, houses are insulated and they have air conditioning, which we don't tend to have, which is a massive oversight on our part in the UK.
Well, yeah. I mean, the way things are going. But anyway, less of the weather. Have you been writing this week? Have you been up to anything creative? What's your week been like in that sense?
Yeah, I've been writing a bit. I'm actually behind on a deadline, which is a bit of a pain.
That's no surprise from you, Chris.
Yeah, do you know what? I actually set the record last time. I got my submission in on time, but this time it's a slow and steady pace, but it's because I'm writing something completely new. I've never done it before. And yeah, I'm trying to learn as I go along. And I think I'm being a bit too harsh. I just need to get the words out. But
often that happens with writers, especially newer writers, that they don't kind of trust in their process and their abilities, which, Chris, you've got a proven record of writing good quality writing. So I think you should just go for it and get that draft out and see how it goes. Because the more you think about that process, the longer that's going to take, and the more you think about the wrong things,
Yeah, I think you're right there. But I've been reading Stephen Jay Gould's new book, and that's been fantastic. And I've got Chuck Palahniuk's new book today as well, and I've got Stephen King's one on the list. So there's plenty of reading going on in the mix. What about you?
Everyone's TBR is ridiculous. I know that. Slow on the writing front. I really haven't been able to get into my screenplay this last week or so. That's down to many different reasons. And this show always takes up a lot of that time. So it could be an excuse. I know I've sat down and watched a few telly programs. Could I have changed that for my writing time? Of course, I probably could have, but it's the way it is at the moment. And I'm not bothered because I know at some point that motivation and that kind of process will click back into place and it'll just happen. So I'm not bothered that it's not like a writing block. It's just my life is kind of revolving in other places right now. So I'll get there in that sense. And I've got a great story lined up. So I'm not worried at the moment.
If only we had a brilliant author that we could chat to that could help us out in this situation.
Yeah, I know. I mean, tonight's guest, guys, you may recognize from a previous show when she appeared as Caedis Knight with another guest. So I'll introduce her now, and we're going to get a good story about her writing career and her books. And that book up in the top cover, Chris, top corner that you can see, it's fantastic. And there's a good story about the author, the picture in the cover. And we'll get to hear about that very soon. So please remind yourselves that during this show, you can ask questions throughout. You can make comments that we can see on the screen. And there's a dedicated section right at the end for you guys to leave your comments and ask your questions to the author and to us. So please utilize that to the best of your ability. And remember, this is for the writing community. Be part of it. Enjoy the chat and get to meet the people in the chat that stay with you, because we're all part of the same community, and this is what this show is made for. So yeah, get chatting with them. So let me get on with it, Chris. I know you're waiting for our guest, and I'm rambling. So tonight's guest...
No, I'm looking at the comments. It's mental. Yeah, get in there. There's lots of really good authors and great writers in there as well. And they're going a little bit crazy. So yeah,
well, that's what we like. So tonight's guest is Natali Simmonds, who is not your average author. She's a creative powerhouse who wears many hats in the world of literature. Under her own name, Natali Simmonds, she crafts thrilling and suspenseful tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. As N J Simmonds, she ventures into the realms of fantasy and manga, whisking readers away to enchanting worlds. And as part of the writing duo Caedis Knight, she co-authors captivating paranormal romance stories that are bound to make your heart race. You may recognize Natali, as I said, from previous interview with Caedis Knight, but now she's here promoting Good Girls Die Last, which has already been optioned, which is incredible. So we're going to chat all about that very, very shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Natali Simmonds. Hello, Natali.
Hello. What an introduction. I've just made a note here. I am a creative powerhouse. I'm going to put that on my bio. Not only did you sacrifice the rugby for me tonight, but you called me a creative powerhouse. That's it. It's my evening, mate.
Thank you so much, Natali, for being here with us. I hope you're doing well.
Very well. Thank you. Yeah. And as you said, I've been very busy. And as you can see behind me, that's a lot of books with a lot of different genres. There's lots to talk about tonight.
There certainly is. Yeah. Whereabouts in the world are you coming from tonight?
Well, even though I'm originally from London with a Spanish family, I now live in the Netherlands. So we have the same sweaty weather as you, which is why I'm sitting in my living room instead of my office, because my office, I thought it was a good idea to convert the room that's got all windows with views of the garden. And actually, it's just like working in a greenhouse. So
talk to us about the Netherlands. What's that like to live in? And is there a kind of writing scene there?
I don't know, because I'm basically a hermit when I'm over here. So I spent all my summer in Spain generally, because that's where my house and my dad and a lot of friends and family are. And that's where I am with the family and that. And then the rest of the time, I'm either in the Netherlands working my ass off and literally not leaving the house, or I'm in London working, and that's when I'm much more with my community. So are there a lot of writers? There are. I've got my friend Telton mentoring. She's an Albanian writer and she lives in Rotterdam, and sometimes we meet up, and that's nice to have her here. But other than that, not really. Most of my my writer friends are either in Spain, a couple in Spain that I met when I lived there, and 90% of them are in the UK. Yeah,
and London, I'm assuming, is a very busy place and a great place for networking when it comes to kind of the writing scene.
Yeah, I always come back ill because I basically land and it's like I'm with my mum, with my sister, with my agent, with my editor, with my friends, publicity, and I will be working like 18-hour days or something absolutely ridiculous. And I come back and my husband's like, "You've done it again, haven't you?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm really not well. I haven't slept. I've been eating nothing but fast food for a week, but it's worth it because I do squeeze it all in." Yeah. I used to live in London most of my life. I lived there, so I miss it. I miss it a lot.
So the question is then, where is your preferred place to go and work in terms of a writer? Where do you find the most creative output?
I think wherever I am and I'm left alone. So at the moment, it's the Netherlands, not because the Netherlands particularly inspires me, but the weather's a lot like the UK weather. So I'm not out. I'm not like in Spain on the beach and having fun and having a drink with my mates. I'm most of the time I'm cold and I don't have that many friends and family here. So it's just me and my hoodie working. So yeah, I'm very, very productive when I'm here. And then I'm in London, I'm doing all the hobnobbing, and then in Spain I have fun. So I'm very, very, I'm very lucky. Sorry, it makes me sound like a I'm not like
I'm trying to picture the idea of hobnobbing in London, what that means.
Yeah, well, but no, it's just because my family's scattered all around the world, so I don't really get to keep very still. I had one child in one country, another child in another. My husband's work here, so
yeah, very, very busy. Okay, what we're going to do is play the first video, and we're going to play part one. Or play part one, Chris. That's not the right wording, is it? Commence part one?
No,
I'm not really sure.
Yeah, go with that.
Yeah, commence part one. So, which is the road to writing. So, we're going to play this video. We're going to find out kind of how you got into the writing world, and hopefully pull some great information, writing advice and tips out of that as well, but also discover your journey. So, right after this, we'll discover that. So, Natali, let everybody know how you got into the writing world, what the inspiration was for you when you first started writing, and how you actually took that step.
Yeah, my journey's not a standard one, but I bet everybody says the same thing. Like, oh, I didn't do it the normal way. I know a lot of people that went to university, studied creative writing, got a degree in it, looked for an agent. But I didn't. I've been writing since I was literally able to hold a pen. So I've still got the storybooks that I wrote when I was 5 and when I was 8 and when I was 12, and the angsty teen things. We didn't have fan fiction or even internet when I was a teenager. So I've got notebooks full of all these stories. And I did a lot of writing like that just for myself, obviously, as a child. And then I stopped in my 20s because I liked making money. And I was working, and my background was marketing, and I was living in London. And, living in London in your 20s is awesome. I had some really, really cool jobs. And I just didn't think about writing, actually. And then had my first child. When she was 10 months old, we moved to Spain. Had my other child. We went there for my husband's work, but my family's Spanish, so my dad was there, and I speak the language, so that was fine. And suddenly I found myself really, a little bit desperate, to be honest. I was incredibly sleep deprived. And when I say sleep deprived, I mean like I had 4 years where I didn't have more than 2 hours consecutive sleep. So I was mental, like I was hallucinating to the point I nearly fell asleep at the wheel. Like, it was bad. And I was working, and I had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I thought to myself, I need to do something to kind of keep myself from going mad. And I started making up this story. The story came to me in a dream. It's a bit cliche, about a guy and this girl, and how they were fated to be together over thousands of years. And it's a very paranormal, esoteric twist to it. It was all set in North London. And I got obsessed with it, and I'd drive to work thinking about it, and I'd be up at 3 a.m. and 5 a.m, 11 o'clock at night, thinking this story, thinking, well, if I can just escape into this world, then I'm not going to resent my children for not letting me sleep between them. And that was The Pathkeeper, which you can see behind me there. And I went on a writing course where I met Isabella May, who is an indie writer, and Emma Claire Wilson, who's now with Avon. But at the time, they were just two very bored, desperate mums that wanted to write a book one day. And we all ended up in this group together. Now we're all published and got lots of books out there. And it just snowballed from there. And the first book I ever wrote was the one I was obsessed with. And it became The Pathkeeper. That was published. It was the first of a trilogy, fantasy trilogy. It was a rocky road. That publisher was Accent, but it was their YA division, and it went under. Accent ended up being bought out anyway by a bigger publisher, but I lost everything. And I had a choice. Like, I could have self-published, but this was back in 2017. A lot of people weren't doing it. Well, I wasn't confident anyway. And it took me 9 months to find a publisher in the US, a small publisher, BHC, and they took on the trilogy and published the other 2. So I ended up with all 3 books out in the world. They're only little, and my big dream was to have an agent and a trad deal. Then I started co-writing with Jacqueline Sylvester, one of my best friends. And she approached me and said, do you want to write like for fun? This was in 2019. Do you want to write like smutty, vampire, sexy, paranormal? I've got this like world where I was like, yeah, that sounds fun. We won't tell anyone it's us. We'll just make loads of money writing smut. Yeah, great. But then we were really proud of what we wrote. So we told everyone it was us, because these books aren't actually just like, they're not erotic or anything. They're just slightly sexy adult fantasy. And again, that snowballed. It became really popular. We've now got 4 books out in a series of 7 books. We self-published it. I did a few mangas as well. And the whole time I was still trying to get an agent. 2 books were shelved. I wrote 2 middle grade books with Anna Waterworth, who's an established middle grade and a YA writer. Again, they died on submission with her agent. And then I had the idea for Good Girls Die Last. So I can't do this thing where it's like you have to go in the opposite direction of what it is, don't you, on these cameras? And with this book, I just had enough. I thought, I want an agent, but I can't keep writing books and throwing them away. Like, this is a stupid system. So I've got 20 odd years of marketing. I started working in marketing when I was 18. So I thought, okay, let me look at this from a commercial perspective. A book is a product. I'm trying to get an agent. An agent has to sell a book. What is my pitch? I need to come up with something that makes people go, oh my God. Because if they say that with one sentence, then the agent will want me, and then she'll be able to sell it to an editor. They'll be able to sell it to, the bookstores. So I came up with this idea for Good Girls Die Last, and the 1-line elevator pitch. I was applying the whole kind of filmmaker's strategy, and it's young woman about to turn 30, living in London, Spanish. There's a heat wave, and she has to cross the city on foot when everything grinds to a halt to get back to Spain for a family emergency. So she decides to walk to City Airport, and there's a serial killer on the loose. So you've got a quest across London in a heat wave with a serial killer on the loose. And it's based a lot on the comps were falling down and promising young woman. So straight away, everyone was like, okay, I think I know where this is going to go. And you don't, because there's this huge twist halfway through. And it's very feminist. And it got me an agent in 3 days and a book deal in 3 weeks with headline and a TV deal before it was in the shops. And I thought to myself, Jesus, it was because I thought of the marketing before I wrote a whole bloody book. And maybe it was luck, but I like to take some credit for it.
Well, to be honest, marketing is one of the biggest hurdles we face as an author, whether you're published or not. It's a real big challenge, and that's something we really have to pick your brains at. But first of all, I want to go back to the fact you said you speak Spanish. What is you're watching the Writing Community Chat Show in Spanish?
Do you want me to translate your name as well?
Go for it.
Okay. Estás viendo la comunidad de escritores. I could say anything, couldn't I, really? And you'd be like, oh, well done.
Yeah.
I hope you didn't. There's someone from Spain thinking, oh, that was a funny bit.
Yeah.
Right. I actually did a TikTok the other day because a lot of people are like, oh, you're Spanish. Oh, you're from London. They think I'm going to either sound like an EastEnders character or Penelope Cruz, right? And I don't. I don't like, I sound quite kind of English. And so I did a whole TikTok in Spanish and I explained the whole book in Spanish. And I was like,
amazing. Well, so that story you just described was absolutely incredible from start to finish. And there were a few things that really jumped out at us there, from having your deal go down because of the company folding. That's really interesting. And to the point where you just talked about how you because of marketing knowledge, you kind of made this book really successful. So if I take you back, I know Chris has got a question there somewhere. If I take you back to that point where you've had all this desire to write these books and using it as an outlet, which you rightly said, and people have resonated with in the comments, writing is a brilliant outlet for like a kind of life and stress and whatever that might be. When that company folded and your work and the effort you put into it disappeared with that, how did that make you feel as an author? And was there ever a doubt of, oh, this is me done? Or did you think, no, I'm going to have to keep pushing this?
No, I was never going to stop. I told everybody I was going to be a successful author.
Yeah.
And I remember people saying, well, you've done it now. It was in the shops, you're done. And I'm like, I'm not done. It's a trilogy. I'm getting these great reviews. People can't wait for the second book. I'm not going to let them down.
Yeah.
I have to do this. And so yeah, no, and I don't think I'll ever stop, ever. And it was a very conscious decision to move from fantasy to thrillers, because I thought, well, what are people reading right now? They're writing thrillers. what vehicle can I get my message across? I've got my books are they're very thematic. So when you read the reviews for Good Girls Die Last, it's very much like this is more than a thriller, because it's got some really big themes on immigration, on sexism and feminism, and what it is to be a woman working in a big city. So, you know, it can be serious. It's also a bit humorous and light, but it's all packaged as a thriller because people like thrillers.
Yeah.
And I tend to write quite page turnery in a way. I'm, well, I say little, I'm not officially diagnosed, but I'm ADHD and all over the bloody place half the time. And I've got no attention span. So I write as if someone's going to put my book down. I'm terrified of them getting bored. So my books are really pacey, probably because I've got no attention span. Yeah.
I suppose my question, Natalie, was, did your writing process change when you decided on a conscious level to go, do you know what, I'm going to write a very marketable book? Whereas from the past, obviously you talked about writing from your, you know, just having fun, writing because you became obsessed. Whereas this process, I'm assuming, may have been very different because you had a different idea in mind, a sort of different end goal. So did that change your processes at all, or?
Yeah. I mean, I came up with this idea in the August, and I had an agent by the January and a deal by March. That's how fast I turned this around. But of course, it wasn't the first book I'd written. I'd already written 11 full novels and co-written and written full novels. So I wasn't approaching it as a newbie anymore. I know how to structure a book. I did so I approached it from a marketing perspective. I did the hook before the book. I ran it past a lot of writer friends, which I didn't have at the beginning. And I said, what do you think? They're like, oh my God, yes. Sent them the blurb. What do you think? Oh my God, yes. Sent them the synopsis. They're like, yeah, keep going. So I did it in reverse. You know how people write a book and then they try and turn it into a synopsis? I'm like, that's so hard. Write the synopsis and then you know what your book's about, and then just write the longer version, right? So, and I did, I also love Save the Cat, which I think I might have talked about with Jackie when we were talking about Caedis Knight, which is a very structured storytelling format for film, which also makes me wonder if that's why I got optioned for TV, because I wrote it like a movie with the beats in the right places. And I did all of that for 3 months. And then I did NaNoWriMo, and I literally wrote the first draft in 4 weeks. I got up every morning at 6 a.m. I had it finished by 9. So I did 3 hours every morning before I worked. I was working for Jericho Writers at the time. And I zoomed through this book. It was an easy book for me to write. I know what it's like to be in your 20s in London being harassed. Didn't have to do much research. So yes, and now every single book I do, I literally create a marketing plan. I do the pitch and I plot it. And it's much faster.
So marketing is as I mentioned, one of the biggest hurdles we face as authors. What advice have you got then, as someone who's got experience professionally as a marketer, to kind of take that on as an author, to kind of bring people into the right kind of mindset to want to buy your book? Is there any certain techniques you can share and help people in that sense?
Yeah, attend my courses. I teach self-branding at Raindance Film School in London online. And that's I think a fundamental part of any creative journey is to understand your brand. You guys have got a really strong brand, because I think when it comes to differentiating yourself from other people, it's much more than, is your book good? You could have the best book in the world. If nobody knows it exists, then it's not going to be successful. And likewise, you can have an okay book that ends up a huge bestseller because it's just really well marketed and people have heard of it and give it a go. Then, of course, if it's good, then word of mouth kicks off. So, I mean, my advice would be to really work out who you are and who you want to be in the industry, and make sure that you've got a website, make sure that you've got social media, get a newsletter if you don't have the support of a publisher. Decide what journey you want to be on. Do you want a small publisher? Do you want a big publisher with an agent? Do you want to go indie? Because that's 3 completely different ways to approach your career. And ask yourself if you're just writing this book of your dreams and that's enough because you've got a proper job and you're fine, or if this is what you want to do for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Because this is, I'm not going to ever stop. You know, I'm serious about it.
Yeah. I suppose with Save the Cat, obviously Save the Cat is a best-selling novel within itself. And thousands of people buy it every single year. But they haven't had the same success that you have had. So what have you done differently to the people who buy Save the Cat and use it as a writing tool, but don't have that success, where do you think your tips and advice could be? Like, if you could just maybe give 2 or 3 tips from somebody who has maybe picked it up, they've gone through it themselves, and they're looking to have somewhat similar success to what you've done.
I think there's 3 ingredients to a successful book. The right hook. If you can sum it up and say, you know, it's falling down, meets promising young woman. Woman has to cross London in a heat wave. She has to get her flight on time, but there's a serial killer on the loose. It's 1 sentence, right? And that's enough to make people go, oh, I think I know what I'm getting with those comps, right? If you can start with that, then you've got your hook. If you then plot your book well, then you've got good pacing, you've got all the information in the right place. So you've got your peaks, your troughs, and all of that. That's important to keep people hooked, especially with a thriller. You don't want to go off on a tangent. And then you need to write well, and that's subjective. But as I said, this is the 12th book I'd written, so I knew how to write at that point. The Pathkeeper's not structured in the same way. I'm not saying obviously it's a good enough book. It's got a publishing deal, but you can see that it's not as tight. And I also have a fantastic editor and a fantastic agent, both of which make a lot of changes to the book before it's in the hand of readers. So there's a lot of things that make a book an enjoyable read. But I also very consciously thought of themes that were relevant. Sadly, the exploitation and abuse of women never goes out of fashion. So, you know, even with the football thing lately. So it's always relevant. And it was interesting talking to STV, who have optioned it to a TV series, because they said, we've been looking for a Me Too book for ages. But this wasn't a man-hating book. This wasn't a let's murder all the bad men and be just as bad as the men who murder women. That's bullshit. Sorry. I can swear, can't I? But
yeah, of course.
Awesome, because I do. It's not that. It's more of a mirror. And I've been saying to people, it's more of a mirror than just a thriller. It's just a reflection of society. I'm not out to be like didactic and be like, all men are bad, because that's bollocks. All men aren't bad. All men who kill women are bad, obviously. And there's some really kind of questionable female characters in it as well, which still explores misogyny, but from a different perspective. So yeah, there's a lot of different things to consider, but I don't know. Is it a success? It's not. It's like, you know, I'm not a Sunday Times bestseller or anything, but this is the closest I've got to being where I want to be. And I hope it's the first step, you know?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of themes in there that obviously touch on people's opinions, obviously. And I'd be interested to know how you really write those without, it might sound silly, without possibly offending people, or do you not care about that if you know what you believe is right and you're writing that? Does that make sense?
Oh, I don't give a shit. You can't care about offending somebody. How can you can't? Because if you really capture the imagination and empathize with one set of people, then you're inadvertently going to offend the other set of people. So you really have to write for yourself. And I give a balanced argument. As I said, I don't go out there trying to kind of make a point, but I have had my only 1-star reviews. One guy, he was called Florida Man. So I'm not going to that. He's not kind of clearly a literary critic or anything. He said, this is absolutely horrific, extreme feminism. And I was like, cheers, mate. You've really just done me a favor, because your awful review has now appealed to all the extreme. But it's not kind of man bashing at all. But I don't think you can overthink what you say. Obviously, you've got to be respectful to communities. You're not going to go out there being racist or anything unless your character is, and that's part of the art. But you really do have to write from your own experiences. And all these things that happen in the book have happened to me or a friend to some extent anyway. Yeah. So I'm only writing what I know.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of people in the comments saying, "Oh, Florida man strikes." If we go back to when you spoke about the amount of novels you've written, which is quite an extensive list, how has your writing process changed from, say, books 1, 2, 3 to Good Girls Die Last? Because that must have been a change for you at some stage where you feel like your writing improved or you learned something new. How has that journey gone for you?
as far as I'm concerned, whichever book I'm working on is my best one yet. Which
Yeah.
it makes no difference if you like bake cakes or fix cars. I'm sure you get faster and better at it the more you do it. I mean, better is a subjective term, but yeah, I mean, I've written now. I've written 13 full novels and co-written. Published that you can buy are 8. And there were different genres and obviously some manga, which was a bit of fun. So I was just experimenting because I really do think creative diversity is key, because storytelling is just storytelling, right? Yeah, to answer your question, I'm faster now. I mean, I'm currently working on 4 books simultaneously.
Wow.
Which I wasn't able to do obviously at the very beginning when I was sleep deprived with a 1 and 3 year old. That 1 and 3 year olds now 12 and 14, so they leave me alone now. But I think teenagers are fantastic. They don't want to talk to their parents. It's awesome. You get loads of time. But yeah, I'm much faster now. So I'm, editing 1 book, plotting 2 others, and then obviously continuing the series with Jackie with our next one in the Caedis Knight series. And I can work on all of them at the same time. And I'm on deadline now. I've got an agent, an editor, and people to answer to.
That's amazing. To juggle 4 books at once is a massive task. Do you ever feel like there's a point where you're confusing the timelines or perhaps mixing characters up? Is that ever an issue for you?
No. I mean, I have to work on more than 1 project at a time because, as I said, my concentration span's awful. And I just can't really do anything for more than half an hour at a time, or like maybe a few hours. So I time block. I'm really strict, and my diary is time blocked, even like, 1 hour for lunch, homework with the kids, movie night with the family, ring my mum. It's all in my diary, and I will tick everything off, and I have to do that. So if I sit down and say like, no, you've got to write for 3 hours because you've got to hit your deadline, then that's what I'm going to do. I think that's the only way to take it seriously. I mean, this is my job, this is my career. And but no, I don't get mixed up at all, because they're very real to me. They're like movies in my head. So.
Yeah. It's interesting when you mention your family and they're bigger now. Do they ever give you influence or input about your stories? Because my teenagers, they started reading my books, but they kind of fizzled out. They're not really into reading. So I never kind of got that from my friends. Well, my close family, they weren't really into the books, so that kind of didn't happen. Do you get that feedback for yourself from kind of your husband and perhaps your kids?
They don't read them. No, I mean, they don't read them before they're written. My husband, he read The Pathkeeper because it was my first ever book, and I remember he read it on holiday, and his feedback was, "Oh, it's like a proper book." That's nice. And then when he read The Good Girls Die Last, he waited until it was published, and there was a TV deal on the table, wasn't there? And he was like, "Oh, I'll read it now then." I'm like, "Oh, thanks. Must be good then." And then he loved it, which I was really pleased about, because I always get very excited when men and my editors male read this book, because I was just so scared of the whole feminist angle, because I didn't want to alienate anyone, because that's, as I said, it's not man bashing. But my kids can't read my books because they're full of sex and swearing. But they loved when I was writing middle grade with Anna Waterworth. Even though those books haven't so far got anywhere, that's not to say they won't one day. They might still get subbed by her agent. I don't know. But we took it in turns to write chapters. And then every couple of days, the kids would be like, "Have you got a new chapter? Has she written hers yet? And have you written yours yet?" And they were younger at the time, and they'd sit and listen, and they loved them. And I wrote a whole fantasy book that was 140,000 words that they helped me write. They helped create the monsters and the characters. They felt like it was theirs. And that one died on on querying. No agent wanted it, for good reason, to be honest, because it wasn't right. So I printed it out for them, and they're the only ones that have actually got that book. And now I've taken it apart and I'm rewriting it as an adult fantasy to fit the market a bit better.
Amazing.
And they're really gutted that it'll never exist. But I'm like, but you've got the only copy and you helped write the original, So yeah, my kids are super creative, especially my youngest. She wants to be a screenwriter when she's older. And I always go to her for plot holes because she just thinks outside the box.
That's amazing. Yeah. Do you think that the fact that you spent your career writing in that sense, that's influenced them to want to go down, say, the screenwriting kind of path?
It's weird. I come from a long line of artists. So my grandfather from Barcelona, he like studied at the same school as Dali. Well, they knew each other kind of vaguely. But the difference was Dali was like super famous and my grandfather was absolute bonkers and very, very poor. So he should have done better marketing. And my dad's was a designer, like graphic designer, also Spanish. So I've always we paint like as kids. We didn't have a lot of money growing up. I didn't speak English when we moved to Spain. We were homeless for a year, sleeping on sofas and got a council flat and stuff. So our days out were just drawing. My dad would take me and my sister out to draw pictures. That was what we did. And so I've always had that in my life, he'd make up a lot of stories, my dad, and would paint and draw and stuff together. I don't know why I'm saying it in the past tense, like, I spoke to him today. He's still insane. And my mum's an English teacher. And my dad worked for a book company. So back then, BCA Books, there was no Amazon. So you'd be a club member and you'd get a magazine every month and you pick the books you wanted. And he designed those magazines. And he's not a reader. He's really dyslexic, my dad, and his English is still pretty shit after all these years. But he'd come home with all these boxes of books that didn't have covers on that had been used for the magazine photos and stuff. Because that was like before digital photography, so that had to actually take pictures of them. So we had like boxes of books and you didn't know they had no covers on them. So you didn't know if it was going to be Terry Pratchett or if it was going to be a book on Da Vinci or whatever. And as I said, we had no money. I don't remember once going to a bookshop ever.
See how lucky we are, people, these days. You can just buy your books online in seconds.
3 or 4 months, And so they were the influences that I had. So my eldest wants to go to design school and she paints and draws and tapestry and she's very creative, and my youngest loves telling stories. So
amazing.
My
definitely
husband can't off on them at all, actually. He's very sporty musical, but no, they're not.
Well, that's fantastic to see the creativity flowing down the generations in that sense, and really cool. Okay, we're going to move on to part 2 of the show, which is called What's the Story. We're going to talk, I know you mentioned about your book already, we're going to talk a little bit about that. We'd like to hear your pitch again, if you can do that after the video, and then we'll dig into that a little bit and talk about that cover, which I know you've got some comments on as well. So we'll play this video, we'll get into it. So Natali, let everybody know what Good Girls Die Last is all about.
Right. Good Girls Die Last. I can actually, I'll read you the blurb because it's probably the quickest way of doing it. Today, nothing is going right for Em, and it's about to get much worse. Heartbroken by a recent split with her 30th birthday looming, she loses her job and her home in the same morning because of 2 basically dishonest men, the boss who sexually harassed her and the flatmate sleeping with her behind her his fiance's back. But all Em can think about is catching a flight to attend her sister's wedding. So that's your premise. But with a record-breaking heat wave and a serial killer making the streets unsafe, London is completely gridlocked. Em's life has always been full of men getting their own way, and today the scorched city teems with them standing between her and home. As Em's troubled past returns to haunt her, she refuses to let them win. Her defiance leads to shocking consequences that soon spiral wildly out of control. In a world where men don't listen and girls have no voice, one woman can change everything. Today, no one will be staying silent. So it begins with a very repressed woman. She's half English, half Spanish. So I draw from my own experiences there. She is very repressed sexually as well because she was in a relationship where she's always fought her sexuality, but she's bisexual. She's just broken up from her girlfriend. She hasn't told her family about her. She comes from a very Catholic Spanish family. She's had a hard childhood, which you learn more about as the story goes. So she was taught basically, if you're a good girl and you keep your mouth shut and you keep out of trouble, no harm will come to you. So that's where the title comes from. She soon realizes that actually it makes no difference if you keep your mouth shut or if you're really gobby. If something's going to happen, right? So she, as the tension rises in the city with the serial killer on the loose, and we see Twitter. So there's her story and her backstory, and then you've got this Twitter dialogue going on the whole time. So you see the temperature rising, you see her own internal struggles rising alongside this kind of collective tension with this serial killer, because women are turning up all over London dead, until it comes to a point where the straw that broke the camel's back and she snaps, and then it all just completely spirals out of control. And I think we've all felt like that, right? Where it's like, okay, I'm having a bad day, but I just need one thing. And it might be that they forgot to put the mayo in my sandwich, just one thing, and that's it, I'm going to blow. And I wanted to explore that. So it's a very linear storyline. It's set basically within 24 hours. It's very, very fast paced.
Mm. You mentioned earlier that you write fast paced because of kind of you're fearful of readers putting the book down. Yeah. How would you approach that in a novel, and especially in this novel here, that within 24-hour timeline, you've got to really keep that fast pace whilst telling the story in such a confined time? How would you kind of do that as a writer?
Well, I found it a lot easier plotting this book because I knew the route she had to take. I haven't walked to City Airport, but I know, I know the area. So she goes from the Strand to City. So I knew the route that she was walking. So that was easy. I knew what had to happen in each point. I knew the areas around London. Oh, thanks, Anya. She got the Audible version. Yeah. I mean, the actress that does the voice is absolutely brilliant. So I knew that something horrific had to happen to her at each point, and I had to tie it in with where these women were going to be turning up as well. And the women that are all being killed have got long, dark hair, like her. So you're wondering how these two stories are going to connect. So it was actually kind of, for me, easier to write because, my other book that I hope will come out soon is set over 3 or 4 weeks. And it's like, it's hard to get the chronology right. Well, how many days have passed? Wait a minute, that's a Saturday. Okay, that can't happen on a Saturday because she's at school. That's hard for me. But this was like every hour, Yeah. And it was great talking to the TV studio and the producers about how they envisaged the TV series, because it's very much like 24. Yeah. That real time. And then while she's just walking, then you go back and you can explore her backstory a bit more and a few flashbacks. So that quest kind of journey that she's on, for me, was much easier to write because it's just a straight line. And the characters were really fun. So yeah, it was just one of those books that came ready formed, and I was hoping the ones that followed would as well, but they're proving to be a bit harder. So maybe this was a gift from the universe.
Yeah, definitely.
So Natalie, I'm really interested about the serial killer aspect, because normally in thrillers you have sort of 2 ways to present a serial killer. Either we don't know anything about them and it's a complete and utter mystery, or we kind of are aware of who they are from the start and we sort of follow their journey as well as the protagonist. So how did you create your serial killer for Good Girls Die Last? What was going through your mind when you knew that's what you wanted, but you knew you needed to create a character?
I did something that isn't done that often, and I completely took the spotlight off him. I don't want to give too much away, but it's actually not about the serial killer. He becomes more of a metaphor for this constant underlying tension and threat that a lot of women feel like they're always under, like anything could happen to them at any moment. So without giving too much away, it's actually not about the serial killer at any point. It's actually about the fact there's a serial killer out there, and something could happen to her, and something could happen to anyone, and it could be anyone, could be any one of the people that she's coming across. So it's that perceived threat more than a direct threat that I wanted to explore.
So that will obviously determine her.
What happened?
Yeah, that will obviously dictate her path because of what she feels and fears around her.
Yeah, and she's got no choice. She has to catch this flight. Her mum's dying and her sister's getting married, and if she misses the wedding and she doesn't see her mum, like, she has no choice. She has to get this flight. It's gridlock. London Transport's on strike. It's record-breaking temperatures, and it was funny actually because I wrote it before last summer's heat wave, and I had it at 41 degrees because I wanted it to be this unbearable heat. And my editor at the time was like, "Natali, can we just tweak it?" because that's really like post-apocalyptic. It's never going to reach 40, 41 in London. Like, just make it unbearably hot, like 34 or something. And I was like, okay. And then the heat wave happened. And I remember sending him an email saying, hot enough for you? And he was like, put it back up, because it's going to be record breaking. So yeah, it was weird last summer watching all this heat wave news, thinking I kind of predicted this.
Well, at the moment we've got this heat wave, and we've got a escaped prisoner on the loose that they're tracking down, and it's all kind of following the line, right? Yeah. So maybe what you write comes to.
So Natali, obviously, when you were writing this, you said that, you know, part of your experiences of being in London, and obviously you've got the heritage of the protagonist as well. What was it like for you, sort of leaning into that anxiety that you may have felt whilst living in London? It was just obviously when you were trying to write this book.
It's a very visceral book. So when you read the reviews on Amazon, other people will be like, I felt tension. I had one woman, a friend, ring me. She's like, I couldn't put it down. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I had my head out the window. I couldn't breathe. It was so hot reading, like, because, you know, you can feel the heat and you can feel the discomfort. And it's called feminist because it's not because it's, you know, anti-men. It's because it's what it is to be a woman. So she starts her period and she's got heels on and it's chafing and it's uncomfortable and she hasn't got pockets. It's bullshit that we have to put up with. She's got this long hair and she goes to tie it up because it's really hot, but then it snaps and she can't, this bloody hair of hers, and she's so hot. So all these kind of things that very much makes it, I've made my hair even worse, but makes it very much what it is to be a woman, and the heat's just adding to the discomfort in general and this ever-present threat of death, alongside blokes going, give us a smile. You know, like, she doesn't need it. She's having a shit day as it is. Thank you very much. She doesn't want to drink. Leave her alone. So yeah, it was hard to write. It was satisfying to write because it healed a lot of things to some extent. But I was tired and angry writing it, and I cried a lot writing it because there are 2 or 3 quite sad scenes as well. But I always think that's a good thing. If I'm feeling the feelings while I'm writing it, then generally the readers will in those parts as well. If you're not crying, then your readers aren't going to cry that way. Yeah.
Before we move on to the final part of the show, guys, where you can ask your questions, Natali, can you talk to us about the cover? Because before we came on here, we discussed it and I found it fascinating. It's a really well-designed cover. It really stands out. And despite being bright in the face, it's also bright with the text. It works really well. But you've got a great story about that person on the cover.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying, because of my marketing background, before I started writing the book, I put mood boards together. So I put a pitch deck together. You don't have to do this. Like, you don't need to be as extreme as I am. I'm very intense. But I put a whole pitch deck together with like blurbs and mood boards and pictures and stuff. And so when Toby, my editor, said, have you got any ideas for the cover? Like, we're just going to run it past you. I was like, yes, I do, actually. I've got a whole mood board. Here you go. He's like, okay, here we go. And my mood board, I wish I had it on me, was, you know, a woman's angry face, and it was all tones of orange, and there's riots, and smoke, and heat, and the city and everything. And you can see the back as well. You know, you can see that kind of hot London skyline. And they did this, and I was just like, oh my God, that's perfect. And because I used to, as I said, I worked for big agencies and marketing and stuff. I used to manage a lot of, I used to do all the creative briefs for the designers. So I'm really quite pedantic, and I look at things from a marketing perspective, not from my own personal, like what I like and what I don't like. And I was bracing myself, and I was like, no, spot on, perfect, great, like, no comments. I think they turned it up. They made it a little bit more orange to make it more hot and sweaty. But other than that, it was spot on. And the woman who designs this cover is the same one who designed How to Kill Your Family. So that's another very good thriller. And then, yeah, so this book was everywhere. And on the bookshelves, you can see all the eyes staring at you. It's very effective. And then I got an Instagram message from a complete stranger saying, hi, this is really weird, but I'm the woman on your cover. And I was like, oh my God, I've got to double check. I think her name is Laura. I'm not very good with names, but lovely when we were chatting. And she was explaining to me that she's not a model. She's not Cara Delevingne, whatever her name is, even though it looks like her. She's a mum of 2 kids and I think lives in Cheshire and loves to do photography for fun and sometimes does self-portraits, which she sells to stock libraries and always wonders where these pictures might turn up, in adverts or whatever. And John Mars recognized her on my cover because she was used on his cover, one of his thrillers, a different picture, but he recognized her face. And so he told her and she contacted me, which I thought was really awesome. And we haven't met up yet, but I'd like to. I want to have a picture of me.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, and I was just over the moon because, again, my editor was like, I sat down and I must have looked at over 100 faces because I was looking for M. M is very distinctive. What she looks like, she has to look half Spanish. She's got this long dark hair. Her eyes are very much, these eyes are perfect because for me, they say they're a little bit sad and they're also very angry and they're also very intense. So that sums up how she's feeling. It's just her journey the entire way.
Incredible.
So
cool.
I'm really happy with the cover. Oh, and the paperback looks just as good, but it's got bright blue. It's just slightly changed up. I haven't got a copy, otherwise I'd hold it up, but it's turquoise blue and it's a bit more commercial because it's going to be more of a holiday read next summer, hopefully. But it's out on 28th of December, the paperback. I should shout about that. Use your Christmas vouchers on that one.
Yeah. Okay, what we want to do, guys, if you've got questions for Natalie, please send those in right now and we will get into those once we've done our staple questions. So part 3 of the show, community questions. Here we go. So, Mr. Hooley, do you want to start us off with our staple questions of the week?
I think we should change them slightly for Natalie because obviously she's been on before. But I forgot to ask this last week, but I really like it because we're on YouTube, obviously, and this could outlive all of us. What would your advice be to somebody who is taking on your characters in the future that was going to, maybe they've been commissioned to pick up your estate and write a couple of books? What would you want them to do?
That's a really good. First of all, my instinct was like, can't touch my stuff. But that's a really good story. Sorry, slightly possessive of my work. I think my specifically for this character would be live that life. Go to Ronda in Andalusia, just sit where she sits, spend a day with the family there, walk that route. I actually wrote this during lockdown, so I was on Google Maps the entire time, and I remember the first time I went back to Trafalgar Square, I was practically crying because I felt like I'd imagined this place. Obviously I hadn't, but when I was there, I'm like, oh my God, it is real. So go to all the locations, and talk if these things haven't happened to you, talk to women that it has happened to, because people think of sexual attacks as like out and out rape or whatever, but it's the microaggressions and it's the very small subtleties where you're like, okay, fine, it wasn't a big deal, I'm going to let it go, that build up. They're the things I explore. If you're attacked and dragged through a hedge or whatever in the street, that's an out and out assault. We know that. But that guy that looks at you at work, or that woman that does this or that says that, whether it's because she's an immigrant or whether, so talk to people that have experienced that, because you can't get your head around these characters without at least having some experience of what they go through.
Yeah, nice. Okay, I will still ask one of these questions, Chris, because I know we might have had these before, but the answers may very well change. Natalie, if you're going to take the ending of anything, whether it's a book, TV show, or film, and change an ending, what ending are you going to change and why?
Romeo and Juliet, because it's one of my favorite stories, and it pisses me off every time. I'm genuinely surprised, like, oh God, yes, of course. It just really, and I know it's not a love story. I know it's a tragedy. That's the whole point. But I would change number one in today's market. an editor would be like, "Oh, you can't do that to the reader, give them a happy ending or at least some level of hope." That's the difference you see in today's market. They'd be like, you can have a tragedy and kill them at the end, but leave them with some hope. Shakespeare's like, "Fuck you, no hope.
Yeah.
Learn your lesson. Everyone dies." So I'd change it. I'd probably have it so that everybody thinks they're dead and they've survived, but taught their family a lesson. That's what I do. I'm not saying any, don't want to compete with Shakespeare here. You knew what he was doing, but things have changed.
And this next question is kind of two-folded, and it's only come in recently with like there being so many references to UFOs. But if you could send one of your novels out into space, which novel would you choose of your own and why? And then the second part of that question is, if you had to give a novel to an alien species that had arrived on the planet Earth to get a grasp of humanity, so it would be the first thing they'd read, or well, we assume they could read, which book would you choose and why? So your own book first, shooting off into the universe, and then a book.
I didn't prepare for this one. I didn't. Oh God. Okay, right. Think on your feet. So it depends what my motivation would be. You see, if I want to mess with them or not. Because if I really want to mess with them, I'd probably send them Vampires of Moscow, which has got this. I mean, I could say it's brilliant because Jackie is the brains behind the majority of the world building, or at least initially she was, with the concept of paranormals living alongside us and having their own corner of the dark web, called the blood web, and then aliens would think that there were witches and vampires and werewolves living among us, and I think that'd be really scare them away. So that'd be a fun one. And then what book do I think reflects society really well? Oh, there are so many, aren't there? But it depends it depends what you're trying to say, because there is just so many aspects of humanity. I thought The Hate You Give was a fantastic reflection of America and a lot of the issues they have there, but it's quite American centric. I don't think it would reflect specifically every country in the world. I want to say something like Orwell, 1984, because we're still assholes now, all these years later.
Yeah,
like we haven't learned. We are literally doing all the things.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I would have gone with that.
Those are the two.
What about you, Chris? Have you got?
I mean, I'd like to
send that.
Dickens. Yeah. What would you? What came to your for that, Chris?
Do you know what? I've never actually thought about it. I did like someone's answer the other day when they said Ulysses, just because of the sheer volume of it, and it'd give us some time to think and not just panic irrationally because we'd just given a book to an alien species.
Beat them over the head with it or something. Yeah, War and Peace. There.
Yeah.
And I think Dickens was
War
really
of the Worlds might be a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. God, yeah.
With a little note that just says, "Yeah, please don't do this." On the
See, it's not going to end well. So.
Cool. Okay. We got a question from Halo, so we'll ask this before we get into the final couple of questions for us, as time is moving on. What are the biggest differences you found between writing fantasy and thriller? Which is a good question.
That's really good. I think fantasy takes longer. Thrillers I write relatively fast because they're set now about people like me. And all my characters are just complex women having a hard time. So I'm like, well, if it's not me, it's one of my mates, But fantasy and world building, and I'm actually in the middle of, I say in the middle, I've been years rewriting this historical fantasy. So when you're researching history and then building an entire world and magic system, it takes forever. And I think that's the difference. That's why fantasy, I guess, ends up being a series, because you're like, I have done 6 months work just building this world. I'm just going to keep writing in that world because I've already done the hard work. I can't create a whole new other world. So with Bloodweb Chronicles, it's 7 books, and there's a few of them behind me there. You can see I keep pointing the wrong way. You can see the vampire one there. And I love the world it's set in. And once you've done that world building, then you're like, I can write any story but set in this world, because I've already kind of created the rules and the laws and the magic. That's my biggest difference.
With Good Girls Die Last, for example, could that ever continue into a fantasy kind of story, or is that you are sticking to this genre as it is?
Oh yeah, I couldn't turn a thriller into a fantasy. Although if someone made me and said you have to, then this would be an origin story.
Yeah.
It would be a bit like Glass, for instance, or that kind of.
Oh, nice.
Because actually, it's actually my cousin's husband used to work he works in film. They both work in film and stuff. And when I told him the premise for this, he got all excited. He was like, "It's like an origin story. It's an origin story. It's like Glass." And I watched Glass, and I was like, "Yeah, because that is a thriller and a complex, motivated, or even Joker. The Joker was again didn't feel like a fantasy when you're watching it, and then he turns into this absolute messed up character, and then he's the baddie in the DC world. So that could work if I was to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Like that.
Have you got like, obviously without any spoilers and things like that, have you got any ideas to maybe carry this story on?
Well, a lot of people have, because it ends a bit ambiguously. I mean, satisfyingly and hopefully, but a bit ambiguous. And a lot of people said, "Is there a sequel?" And I said, "I haven't got plans for a sequel unless I become incredibly huge, like Hunger Games or Twilight." And I'm like, "Oh, you want me to do another one? I'll do another one." But with the TV series being adapted, we have discussed like what happens next, because if it makes it to TV and then it makes it to a second season, where do we go from here? And I know where it goes. You have to, being a writer, you've got basically your iceberg, and the reader only really sees the tip of it. You know what would happen. You know everything that's happened to her whole life and everything that will happen in order to write it succinctly. So I could easily write a sequel, but I don't want to, because I've got so many other stories I want to tell, and I quite like just one book at a time. Also, because I wrote this fantasy trilogy, which was, 120,000 words, 130,000 words, and 140,000 words. That's a lot of book, set in one world. And I want to tell other stories.
Yeah, certainly. So we've gone over the hour already, which has flown by. Before we wrap up, and this is kind of a crucial part of what this show is about. It's about showcasing who you are, what you can create, and what you have created. Exactly what we've discussed. Where can people find your work? Because that's the crucial part. How can they support you? How can they find your work? And how can they find out more information about yourself?
So you can go to njsimmonds.com, or it'll lead you to the same place. But SaveM, hashtag SaveMEM is part of the book. So if you go to save-EM.com, that will also take you directly to all the Good Girls info. And from my website, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn if you're really desperate. I'm everywhere. TikTok, but again, I haven't done too much on TikTok. So Google me. If you Google N J Simmonds or Natali Simmonds, because of the way I spell my first name, I'm not hard to find, and you will find links to me there. So do say hello online, please.
And of course, we will post links in the description of this video and the podcast. If you're listening, go and click on that link and buy the book, please. Annie already said she bought the audiobook. Thank you for supporting the author tonight. It means the world to us that you do that and that you tune in. So thank you so much. Natali, you are a fantastic guest, and you've got a great amount of information, and your story writing is prolific, and I'm sure it's not going to be the last time you're already seeing something. Never stopping.
Relentless.
Chris, have you got anything else before we wrap this up?
No, just absolutely. Thank you for people tuning in tonight, and obviously treating themselves to, ear pleasure with the audiobook. I think I might have to do the same, because I love a good audio on the way to work. But yeah, thanks for joining us. And again, same time next week, we'll be here with another fantastic author. And please go and check all Natali's stuff out.
Thank you so much. That's so much fun. Honestly, I could chat all night. But
we could too, but we want people to enjoy the rest of the evenings, and we'll not commit too much. So
this weekend.
Yes, the weekend. Celebrate Friday, celebrate the weekend, and enjoy yourselves, guys. Please stay safe and read Natalie's book. See you all soon. Bye,
Thank
guys.
you.